Hello again. In the last video, we have performed a simple costing approach where we have allocated all the indirect costs by means of the total direct costs. In this video, we will look at a slightly different approach. Here we will allocate the indirect costs by means of the labor hours. So let us have a look at the calculation that we did in the last video. So we departed with the information that was given, and then here we calculated basically based on the total indirect costs and based on the allocation base, which are the total direct costs, we calculated an allocation rate, and we used this allocation rate in order to distribute or allocate the indirect costs to the products. So I think the easiest way is to simply copy all these calculations to our next spreadsheet. So I will just take this spreadsheet that we have here and make a copy. And I have prepared already an empty spreadsheet here. I will delete this. We don't need it. And then let me just rename here the copied spreadsheet to allocation, and then I will say this is an allocation based on labor hours. So what do we have to change? The information is of course the same. The categories in our tables where we have the per unit costs and the total cost, these are also the same. The direct labor costs will also be the same as before. The same applies for the direct material costs. We do not expect any changes here. So the total direct costs will be actually the same as in the previous example. However, what will change is this allocation base. This allocation base right now is the total direct costs, and we will replace this one by the total labor hours. Let us do this calculation. What are the total labor hours? The total labor hours are the labor hours per unit for product silver times the production quantity of this particular product. And then we have plus the labor hours per unit of product gold times the number of units produced of this product. So we see I took always the hours per unit times the costs per hour for all the products, and I added them up. If there are many products, there is a simpler way to do this. We could simply apply the sum product function. And then we take again these labor hours per unit as one list of numbers. And we multiply each element, and then we add up over all the elements with this number of units produced. So if there are many products, the sum product function comes very handy. So we've got here 2,200 labor hours. Now, what is this allocation rate here? I think we can change the format back to a number. We have here 52.73, and this is basically the indirect costs per labor hour. Then we can go to our tables and have a look at these indirect costs, how they are calculated now. Let's see. I will delete these calculations here first because they are not correct anymore. So Or let me just go back and see what it is that we have in these formulas here. So we have here basically the total direct costs times the indirect costs per labor hour. So that's of course nonsense. So this is why we delete all these calculations, and we recalculate the indirect costs as follows. We will now take the indirect costs per labor hour and we will multiply with the labor hours per unit. And the same calculation also for the second product. And you see there is an error coming up. So this is because this blue box here, the address to the allocation rate, moved also to the right. So let us change this. So again, we have the allocation rate here, the indirect costs per labor hour, times the labor hours per unit. Cool. And then we can go to the other side. Actually, the calculations on the other side, they were already correct. We will add them back again. It's the indirect costs per unit multiplied with the number of units produced. And then we are already finished with our second approach of simple costing. And we can have a look at the difference here now. So if you look at our first example, we had here a profit on the first product, product silver, which was 7.08. And now actually this profit has increased. If you look at the second product, our product gold, then we saw a loss of 2.17. And for this product, in our second approach, the loss has actually also increased to 4.36. So now you see that the allocation base that we choose, namely here total labor hours or total direct costs, is very important for evaluating the profits of these two products. And we see that in the first approach, silver is less profitable than in the second approach, right? And we also see that gold, although there is a loss, is more profitable in the first approach than in the second approach. So then you could ask, which number is better, right? Is it the first approach or the second approach? And we would like to answer this question a bit more in detail when we look at ABC. But right now we can say that we should choose the allocation, namely the allocation of indirect costs to the products, such that it really reflects the cause-effect relationships between resource use and the costs, right, of the products. So basically, what is a better representation of the cause-effect relationship between resource use and these two products? Is it total labor hours? So this means, is the driver of the indirect costs, is it rather total labor hours, or will indirect costs, like in the first approach, rather vary proportionally with the total direct costs? In the next video, we will look at another approach of how we can allocate costs to products. This approach is activity-based costing, and the difference will be that we now really look into these cause-effect relationships between resource use and the products. And then we will find, hopefully, a better way to allocate indirect costs to products. See you then.